What if everything you thought you knew about the ancient world was only half the story? What if the real reason God flooded the earth wasn't just sin, but a supernatural invasion? This is not just a biblical tale. It's a divine thriller buried beneath centuries of silence. Giants once ruled the earth, beings not fully human, born from angels who dared to defy heaven, and women who never knew what they were carrying. The Nephilim weren't legends. They were living, breathing consequences of a forbidden union. Creatures of terrifying strength and unspeakable knowledge, hidden in plain sight within your Bible. But why doesn't anyone talk about them? Why were these stories buried, downplayed, or dismissed as myth? Because their return isn't just a possibility, it's a prophecy in motion. This isn't just a movie, it's a warning, a revelation that stretches from Mount Hermon to your own soul. What began in Genesis was never finished. The Watchers may be bound, but their influence is not. And the giants, well, they've learned to wear different skins. If you've ever felt like something dark is stirring beneath the surface of the world, you're not imagining it. In this film, we will walk through the ancient pages of Scripture and uncover the truth the world has tried to forget. A truth so powerful it could shake your understanding of history, humanity, and even your own identity. Because once you see the Nephilim for what they really were, you'll never look at the world the same again. So let me ask you, are you ready to open your eyes? Or will you turn away, like so many did before the flood came crashing down? In the earliest days of Earth, when the soil was fresh from creation and mankind still walked in innocence, a forbidden desire began to stir among the heavens. The sons of God, known as the Watchers, gazed upon the daughters of men with a longing they could no longer contain. Led by Samjaza, these celestial beings descended upon Mount Hermon and made an unbreakable pact. They vowed to take human wives, knowing it would sever them from their divine order forever. This act wasn't just rebellion, it was the ignition of something monstrous. This wasn't about love, it was spiritual defiance. By taking human women, the Watchers birthed beings never meant to exist, giants called Nephilim. These were not mere humans. They were hybrids of fallen glory and flesh. Towering in stature and unmatched in might, the Nephilim quickly dominated the earth. But what terrified heaven wasn't just their strength, it was their influence. They began to teach mankind forbidden knowledge, unraveling the sacred balance of creation. At first, the Nephilim were seen as heroes, even gods. They brought knowledge of the stars, metalworking, enchantments, and sensual power. But this knowledge was poison in disguise. What seemed like enlightenment led to domination, perversion, and despair. The Nephilim hungered, not just for food, but for power, worship, and control. The world, once a reflection of divine beauty, was being reshaped into something unrecognizable, dark, twisted, and spiritually bankrupt. Humanity began to crumble under their weight. Civilizations formed under tyranny, nature itself was warped, and people forgot the voice of God. The Nephilim ruled as kings of corruption, and their fathers, the fallen angels, watched in silence, knowing judgment was inevitable. The world was descending into chaos, but not without notice, for even in silence, heaven watches, and heaven had a plan. The rise of the Nephilim was not the end of the story. It was the sound of a storm approaching. As these giants walked the earth, shaking the ground with every step, a voice began to rise in the wilderness. A voice of warning, a voice from the heavens. And that voice would come through a man named Enoch. At first, the Nephilim devoured the resources of the earth like ravenous kings, feasting on livestock, forests, and crops. But their hunger grew. When the earth could no longer satisfy them, they turned against mankind. The very people from whom they were born became their prey. Villages were torn apart, cities bowed in fear. The giants demanded sacrifice, submission, and blood. What began as awe quickly became terror. The age of corruption had arrived. The Watchers didn't just stand by, they fueled the darkness. They taught secrets mankind was never meant to hold. Azazel showed them how to forge weapons of war. Others revealed charms, sorcery, and the art of seduction. Women were transformed into enchantresses. Men became murderers and manipulators. The boundaries of creation were violated, and the earth groaned under the weight of forbidden wisdom. The divine design was being rewritten, line by line, soul by soul. As the Nephilim grew more powerful, nature itself began to fracture. Hybrids of beasts and humans began to appear. Magic twisted what was once pure. The skies turned strange, the land wept, and the spirit of mankind weakened. These weren't just cultural changes, they were spiritual mutations. God had crafted the earth with balance, but the Watchers and their children had broken its spine. Evil was no longer hidden, it was enthroned. But in the midst of this chaos, some still cried out to heaven. A remnant of the faithful remained, small, scattered, desperate for hope, and heaven heard them. The cries of the oppressed reached the ears of the Most High. The time of silence was ending. Justice, swift and divine, was rising like a tide. But before the flood, a message had to be delivered. A prophet had to rise. A holy man had to speak the words the world didn't want to hear. The Nephilim thought they were unstoppable. The Watchers believed they had escaped judgment. But there was one man walking among them who saw with different eyes. His name echoed through the heavens. Enoch was coming. In the midst of rising darkness, a man unlike any other walked with God. His name was Enoch. He wasn't a king nor a warrior, but his intimacy with the divine made him more powerful than both. While others feared the Nephilim, Enoch stood firm. His life radiated holiness in a generation drowning in rebellion. He wasn't just a man of faith, he was a vessel for God's voice. And heaven had a message to deliver through him, one that would shake both earth and the heavens. Enoch was taken into the celestial realms, where he beheld the secrets of creation, the movements of the stars and the records of angels. But more than wonders, he saw judgment. He stood before the throne of God and was entrusted with a terrifying truth. The Watchers would not be forgiven. Their offspring, the Nephilim, would be wiped from existence. The age of giants would soon be drowned in divine justice. It wasn't a threat, it was a decree. When Enoch returned, the Watchers trembled. These once proud beings now begged him to intercede for them, hoping his access to God could change their fate. But heaven had already closed the door. The judgment was sealed. No prayer would be heard, no mercy would be given. Their punishment was set in stone, eternal imprisonment in the abyss. The giants, too, were marked for annihilation. The sins of the fathers would fall on the sons. Still, Enoch did not gloat. With sorrow in his voice and fire in his spirit, he warned the people. He called them to repent, to turn from the forbidden ways taught by the Watchers. Few listened. Most mocked him. But Enoch knew his role wasn't to convince the world. It was to speak truth before the storm. His words became a final light before the flood. He was the trumpet of God in a land overrun by beasts in human skin. And just as his warnings reached their crescendo, Enoch vanished. He was taken alive by God, spared from the wrath that was about to pour out on the earth. The world would soon witness what happens when divine patience runs out, and that reckoning began with rain. While the world laughed at Enoch's warnings, one man quietly obeyed, Noah. He wasn't a prophet like Enoch, nor a warrior like the kings of his time, but he had something rare: unwavering faith. As the skies remained clear and the earth bustled with sinful pride, Noah built an ark. Hammer by hammer, he prepared for a storm no one believed would come. People mocked him, Nephilim sneered, and Watchers looked on with dread. But heaven was no longer silent. Judgment was on its way. God dispatched his holy messengers, mighty archangels with divine orders. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel descended not to speak, but to act. Some were sent to bind the watchers in the depths of the earth, casting them into prisons of shadow until the final judgment. Others incited strife among the Nephilim, turning their pride into rage and their unity into chaos. The once mighty giants began to fall by each other's hands. Then the skies broke open. Torrents of rain poured from above, while fountains from the deep burst beneath. It wasn't just a storm. It was a cosmic cleansing. The waters were judgment made visible. Forests disappeared, mountains sank, and cities were swallowed whole. Screams filled the air as the mighty were brought low. No sword could stop it. No spell could repel it. The earth itself was baptized in divine wrath. Inside the ark, Noah and his family held on to hope as chaos raged outside. That wooden vessel, sealed by God himself, carried not only life, but a covenant. It was a floating altar of obedience in a sea of rebellion. As days turned into weeks, the flood wiped away all flesh corrupted by the Nephilim's legacy. The age of giants was over. The watchers were chained. The earth, once again, was still. And yet, not all was erased, for even after the waters receded, a trace of rebellion remained. A hidden spark in the bloodline, a shadow in the genes, waiting for its time to rise again. But before that would unfold, God made a promise. As the waters slowly receded and the ark found rest upon the mountains of Ararat, a hush fell over the earth. Everything was different. The trees, the sky, the silence. It all felt sacred, as if creation itself had paused to breathe. Noah stepped out, not as a mere man, but as the father of a renewed world. His first act wasn't to build a home or claim land. He built an altar, and there, with trembling hands, he offered a sacrifice of gratitude to the one who preserved him. God looked upon Noah's heart and made a covenant, not just with him, but with every living creature. He set a rainbow in the sky, not as decoration, but as a divine signature. It was a promise etched in light. Never again would a flood destroy the earth. This covenant was more than words. It was a bridge between judgment and mercy, a sign that while humanity may fall, God's faithfulness remains unshaken. The rainbow was not just beauty, it was binding, but not everything from the old world had vanished. Hidden in the veins of certain lineages were remnants of Nephilim blood. They were no longer giants in form, but echoes of that ancient corruption pulsed in later generations. As Noah's descendants spread across the earth, strange beings reappeared, giants among the Canaanites, shadows among the Philistines. The storm had ended, but the battle was far from over. These remnants would go on to challenge the chosen people of God. They stood as reminders that evil adapts. It doesn't always vanish. The Nephilim were no longer towering monsters. They were hidden threats, giants in new flesh. And while some feared them, others forgot the past. But the covenant still stood, the rainbow still shone, and God had not finished writing his story. The next chapters would not be about destruction, but about confrontation. A people would rise to face the giants again, not with size, but with something far greater, faith. Generations later, the children of Israel would stand face to face with the echoes of that ancient rebellion. As they entered the promised land, they didn't just find cities, they found giants. Towering descendants of the Nephilim still roamed the territories of Canaan. Og of Bashan was one of them. His bed alone was over 13 feet long. To the Israelites, these beings seemed invincible. But God wasn't looking for strength. He was looking for trust. When the spies first saw the giants, fear consumed most of them. "We are like grasshoppers in their eyes," they said. But two men, Joshua and Caleb, saw through the size. They remembered who their God was. And when the time came, Joshua led Israel to victory against Og. The mighty king of Bashan fell not because of Israel's weapons, but because of their obedience. This wasn't just war, it was spiritual cleansing, a continuation of divine judgment begun in the flood. But the most famous clash came later. A young shepherd, too small for a soldier's armor, stood before a champion named Goliath. Everyone saw a boy facing a giant, but David saw something else. He saw a man defying the living God. With nothing but a sling and a few stones, David brought down the monstrous warrior. In that moment, the blood of rebellion met the faith of a child, and it was no contest. The legacy of the Nephilim crumbled with a single strike. These weren't just military victories, they were prophetic moments. Each battle reminded Israel and us that no force of darkness, no matter how ancient or mighty, can stand against faith. The giants were strong, the Israelites were outnumbered, but when God fights for you, size means nothing. The Nephilim had ruled through terror, but the righteous conquer through trust. And yet, even after these victories, something remained, a lingering presence, a spiritual inheritance, because while the giants of old fell in body, their influence sought new forms. They would rise again, but not always as flesh and bone. Years passed, and Noah, now old and weathered, sat beneath a tree, watching his descendants build lives, cities, and legacies. But deep within, he sensed something unsettling. The world was changing again, not in size or strength, but in spirit. He saw pride in their eyes, ambition without reverence, curiosity without fear of God. The giants were gone, yes, but the spirit behind them was returning, not in monstrous forms, but in smaller flesh. The Nephilim had once ruled through fear and violence. Now their legacy echoed in subtler ways, through rebellion, arrogance, and the hunger for forbidden knowledge. Mankind was once again climbing towers to heaven, playing with powers they didn't understand. What had begun with watchers descending was now mirrored by humans reaching up, grasping at divinity without humility. The same script, rewritten with new actors. Even today, the influence of the Nephilim lingers, not as ancient myths, but as real spiritual forces that twist truth, mock holiness, and glorify self. The giants we fight now are invisible, ideologies, temptations, inner wars. They invade the mind, not the battlefield. But the strategy is the same: divide, deceive, and dominate. And just like in the days of old, the only true weapon against them is unshakable faith. The story of the Nephilim isn't just about the past, it's a mirror for today's world. When you see corruption rise, when power overshadows humility, when darkness masquerades as enlightenment, you're witnessing the same ancient war. Giants don't always carry swords. Sometimes they wear suits. Sometimes they whisper in your doubts. But they can still be defeated the same way, by those who walk closely with God. Because in the end, the greatest truth this story reveals is this: God always preserves a remnant, always raises a voice, always honors those who stand firm. And even when giants return in new forms, faith will always be the stone that brings them down. The story of the Nephilim is not just about ancient giants. It's about the war between light and darkness that still rages within every generation. You've seen how divine boundaries were crossed, how power without obedience leads to destruction, and how even giants fall when they face someone walking with God. But now, the question turns to you. What giants are you facing today? They may not wear armor or tower over cities, but they attack your mind, your spirit, your identity, pride, fear, lust, deception. These are the Nephilim of the soul, and they fall the same way they always have, through faith, obedience, and the courage to stand when others bow. You were not made to be ruled by fear. You were not created to be deceived by false light. Just like David with his sling, or Noah with his hammer, your faith is the tool that reshapes history, starting with your own. The world may try to resurrect the ancient spirits, but you carry a spirit even older, one who already wrote the final chapter. So what will you do with what you've just seen? Will you walk away, Or will you rise like the remnant God always preserves? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, what spiritual giants are you confronting right now? How has this truth about the Nephilim shifted your perspective? And if this message awakened something in you, like the whisper of a divine calling, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, subscribe, and activate notifications to keep learning the hidden truths buried in the Bible.